Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. So this is going to be a video on planning for and recruiting human resources. So planning for and basically trying to get the people that you need in order to achieve the mission statement of the company. So the first thing we'll talk about is HR planning. So HR planning helps organizations and firms meet business objectives and gain a competitive advantage. So think of a competitive advantage as, okay, something that our company does better than anybody else and can sustain that advantage. It compares the present organization with goals for the future, and identifies what changes must be made to meet the goals. So there are really three stages. The first one is forecasting. The second one is goal setting and strategic planning. And the third one is program implementation and evaluation. And we're going to talk about all three of those stages later in this video. So this is kind of a quick graphical overview of this process, right? So we've obviously got labor, like anything else, there's a market for labor, right? So we call it the labor market. So there's, like any market, there's supply and demand. So we have forecast of labor demand, what labor will we likely need, and then we try to forecast the supply, not always easy to do. And then we have forecasts of labor surplus or shortage. So there's too many people, which is usually means lower wages, or there's few people, so that means higher wages, good for the workers. Goal setting and strategic planning, and then program implementation and evaluation. So the first one, forecasting. So this is the first step in HR planning. So this is where we predict we think we'll have a labor shortage or a labor surplus, so not enough workers or too many workers. We might use statistical methods, possibly regression, or subjective judgment, or frankly both. We may combine quantitative and qualitative methods. So forecasting the demand for labor, we look at trend analysis. So we might construct and apply statistical models that predict labor demand for the next year, given relatively objective statistics from the previous year. So really just looking at the numbers we've had in the past. Are there any trends? Are they going up? Are they going down? And sort of extrapolating those trends forward. Leading indicators, these would be things like objective measures that accurately predict future labor demand, and things like measures of the economy, actions of what are our competitors doing? How is technology changing? Um, Trends in composition of the workforce and overall population. As we know, the US workforce is more diverse than ever, and it's also probably more mathematically challenged than ever. So these are some of the facets that human resources departments are dealing with. So determining the labor surplus or shortage. So planners can compare forecasts for labor demand and supply. This will show projected shortages and or surpluses in each category, and it allows organizations to plan how are they going to address those challenges. So numerical goals provide the basis for measuring success. So it's like anything, you've got to have a way to measure it, and that's typically going to be done with numbers. So the goals should come from the analysis of supply and demand. So human resources strategies, HR strategies must be used to achieve goals. Now, the options differ widely in expense, speed, and effectiveness. The options to address surplus could cause varying degrees of suffering, obviously, and the options to address the shortage vary in terms of how easily the organization may be able to undo any changes that they make. Some companies, smaller companies, typically, more lean, more agile, easier to kind of undo things. Bigger companies, not always the case. So a core competency. This is defined as knowledge and skills that make an organization superior to competitors and create value for customers. So organizations benefit from hiring and retaining employees who can provide a core competency, who are sort of mission driven, as we like to say. Now, this is something that not always comfortable to talk about, but worth going over, and that's downsizing. This is planned elimination of large numbers of personnel with four main objectives. The number one, of course, is to reduce costs. Number two, maybe to replace labor with technology, so maybe automation. Number three, mergers and acquisitions, when two companies come together. So then there may be a lot of redundancy, so they just don't need as many people anymore. And then number four, moving to more economical locations. So you've seen a lot of the US companies, Western companies that have shifted production overseas for cheaper labor costs, for example. Now this may hurt the long-term organizational effectiveness. It could hurt them in terms of loss of talent, and it may also result in demoralized employees, right? Imagine you work in a team of say 10 people. and 5 of them got let go. All the work still got to get done. So obviously that doesn't do wonders for morale. So what are some alternatives to downsizing? Well, reducing hours is an option. This might be a way to more equitably and fairly spread that burden. Um, it's also less costly than layoffs because layoffs will often require all these companies will feel morally obliged to offer severance pay. If they just cut the hours, they wouldn't have to do that. They may look at early retirement programs. Of course, the workforce is aging. And many older workers don't want to retire, or perhaps they can't afford to. Um, we've also seen COVID-19, that pandemic, and the pandemic started in 2020, kind of changed that trend. Um, Despite that, many companies will still offer early retirement to try to induce, more kind of senior, longer term people, typically higher paid people, to retire in order to reduce costs. So what are some options to avoid a shortage? And when we say shortage, we're of course talking about labor shortage. So they may employ temporary and contract workers. This is probably the most widespread method because you can kind of bring them in, use them for what you need, and then they can go. So it gives employers more flexibility, lower costs. The disadvantage, of course, is the workers are not as committed. Why would they be? Because they're not employed typically directly for the organization, and they just view it as a temporary thing. Obviously, allegiance works both ways, so you can't blame the employees for that. And then outsourcing is contracting other organizations to provide a broad set of services. So overtime and expanded hours, workers will appreciate added comp in the short term, but some manufacturing companies do this. They'll kind of put people on permanent overtime because they don't want to they don't want to pay more for hiring more workers. So they'll just take the workers they've got and they'll give them more overtime. Some of them like that, but some people like the idea of overtime it's optional, right? Like I don't have to do it, but some companies will pretty much force you to do it. Manufacturing is kind of notorious for that. So in the long run, workers feel stress and frustration from having to work longer hours. Again, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So implementing and evaluating the HR plan. So somebody obviously must be accountable for achieving the goals. And that person should have authority, or people or teams or whoever it is, departments, should have authority and resources needed, and they should issue regular progress reports. I mean, you could really say that about anything that goes on in the workplace, right? So talent management ties planning and recruiting efforts to organization strategy and employee development. So that's, again, trying to develop these sort of mission-driven employees, if you will. The evaluation should identify which parts of the planning process contributed to success or failure, and then measure the efficiency of the processes. So if we need to make any course corrections, we need to know that as soon as possible, so that we can do that. As far as recruiting goes, um, it really could be defined as any activity carried on by an organization with primary purpose of identifying and attracting potential employees, right? Helps to build a supply of potential hires for when the company needs it. So just because they're recruiting, it doesn't mean that they actually have jobs right now, although a lot of companies will or do. It may just be that they anticipate needs in the future. So they're just trying to see what talent is out there. So the three aspects of recruiting. Number one, personnel policies. Number two, recruitment sources. And then number three, recruiter characteristics and behaviors. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of those in a second. So as far as personnel policies go, we can look at really two things, internal versus external recruiting, and then lead the market pay strategies. So internal policies, of course, you're looking to promote from within. That's very common. Um, Also offers opportunities for advancement, and it makes job more attractive for applicants and employees. And then lead the market pay strategies. So obviously, to most people, pay, it may not be the most important thing, but it obviously is an important job characteristic for most applicants. So recruiting is an advantage when pay for a job is more than current market wages. And that's one reason why a lot of people will kind of like hop around a lot because they can much more quickly advance their careers and their pay by doing that. So they don't sort of stagnate at a particular job, if you will. So employment at will. So this is where the employer or employee may end employment relationship at any time unless otherwise stated in contract. So if you're a contract employee, then you can't do this. Um, I think there's still 7 states in the U.S. where you can be employment at will. North Carolina being one of them. Due process policy. Obviously, due process just means that, if in this context, if they're going to fire somebody, that person should have a right to, why am I being fired? and then possibly appeal the termination. Of course, with employment at will, that wouldn't be the case. Social presence and reputation. So the image of the organization impacts its attraction to prospective recruits. And of course, the internet provides many opportunities to build a positive image and recruit employees. Also provides many negative ones too, if you're not careful. Again, this is why companies have, in probably the last decade or so, they've really kind of latched onto social media and the power of that and how that, that helps their optics. As far as internal sources for recruitment, um, obviously, there's job posting, things like intranets, company bulletin boards, employee publications. Maybe they've got like a company newsletter or newspaper or something like that that they circulate. Some of the advantages, well, one obviously is these are people that the organization knows, so that helps. You're not kind of taking a chance on somebody, if you will. Another is the applicants are knowledgeable about the position, so it minimizes unrealistic job expectations, and it's certainly cheaper and faster than having to look externally outside the organization. So what about external sources? So outside candidates, probably more likely for entry level or specialized positions, bring somebody in, start them at the bottom, see if they can progress their way up. Typically that's going to be used when there are no internal recruits. And they may recruit through direct applicants or maybe referrals. Things like websites, advertisements, schools, and employment agencies. Referrals maybe from people that already work there. So some of the advantages to the external sources are many direct applicants already sold on the organization. The self-selection eases pressure on recruiting and selection systems, and referrals may appear as an unfair hiring practice or what's called nepotism. Now, some other things that companies can use, job search and networking platforms, Indeed.com, Monster.com, ZipRecruiter. Um, these sites will search resumes that workers have posted, maybe for like keywords to help companies identify suitably qualified applicants. Social media such as LinkedIn, of course. Help wanted, probably not common anymore, but some people still use those. I mentioned Monster, Career Builder, Textio there's a whole range of different ones. They might use local newspapers and trade publications. Craigslist had and probably still has a section for jobs. Um, so Ghost Jobs develop a pool of qualified job seekers for the employer. Public employment agencies is another one. The Social Security Act of 1935 requires everyone receiving unemployment compensation to be registered with a local state employment office, and employers can register their job vacancies with their local state employment office. There's also private employment agencies too. This is going to be more for your white collar jobs. The employers will pay a fee for the referral, and then there are also executive search firms that find new jobs for those already employed. Sometimes those are called headhunters. And then, of course, another place which I kind of wanted to end the video on this, colleges and universities, right? Because most of you watching this are college, university students. So, a lot of universities will bring prospective employers to campus for things like internship programs, job fairs, as a way to connect students with the employers, because ultimately that's why we're all in college. All right, as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in a future video. Take care.